While many printers have shifted their focus, Freeport Press has remained committed to the art of print. For companies that need a printing partner for magazines, look no further than Freeport Press. We offer the capabilities a customer would expect from a national printer while offering the level of customer service clients expect from a family-owned business. Freeport Press. We do print, and we do it well. FreeportPress.com.
Engaging with films should be political because this is a form of art that we are still engaging with every day. We need to think about the political significance that enabled these productions because movies need money to be made. It is one of the most expensive art forms with a lot of stakeholders. Movies will always be responding to the urgencies of today. Because of that, we need to politicize our movie watching experience.
A monochromator is an optical device that separates light, like sunlight or the light from a lamp, into a range of individual wavelengths and then allows... Sorry, I failed physics the last time I took it and I would fail it again. I'm not telling you about my shortcomings for any reason though, because a podcast about my shortcomings would be endless. But I thought I'd look up the word when confronted with Monochromator magazine, which aims to quote, deconstruct selected films under a shared monochrome to reconstruct them for social relevance. Look, that's what it says on the website. But when you read the magazine, you get it. This is politics and social issues filtered through big movies. How big? The first issue uses Barbie and Oppenheimer to examine the rise of American power, both hard and soft. Having said that, it's a very interesting magazine and not heavy reading. And editor Alex Heeyeon Kil is not even sure she's editing a film magazine. She sees Monochromator as a discussion about the real world using fictional stories, in this case, movies. And her team, divided between South Korea and Germany, published this annual knowing they might step on more than a few landmines. Strap in or turn on a lamp and take a look at the light and maybe you'll understand what you're seeing better than I ever will. My name is Arjun Basu, and this is The Full Bleed. A programming note. To make our lives and yours simpler, we've combined all of our shows into one channel under the Magazium brand. So if you've been having a hard time finding The Full Bleed, just search and subscribe to the Magazium channel on all of your favorite podcast platforms. How did this magazine come about?
Okay, that's a big question. We have a sister magazine called Prism of, and this magazine started in 2015. It started in Seoul, and now it is the biggest film criticism magazine in Korea. In 2022, when Prism of was 7 years old, the CEO of this magazine, the publisher of Prism of, felt like the company was ripe for another challenge. I knew her personally, and she approached me and proposed another film magazine that was published in English, meant to be distributed internationally. That is how Monochromator came about.
Okay, so the other magazine is in Korean.
Yes.
In Korean for Koreans.
Yes, precisely. It is the best-selling film criticism magazine in Korea. We felt the need to expand our market. We knew what we were doing was very good, and we knew that what we were doing could resonate with more people. But of course, only Koreans speak Korean. So we wanted to start publishing in a language that was more accessible to the wider population of the world. But what Prismov does is quite different from what Monochromator does. Prismov puts one film into a prism, and then the entire issue is about that one film.
Looking at it from various angles.
Yes, precisely. Whereas Monochromator, it's also a light-splitting device, but what it does is it brings a spectrum of lights into a single beam of light. So that is why we talk about 2 films per issue and try to find a surprising and unexpected common ground of the 2 films in order to shed light on the political undertones that created these movies, even when the movies themselves don't feel immediately political.
We'll get to your first issue in a second, but why would they come to you? What's your background?
Oh, okay. I studied literature for a long while. I was part of the academia for about 8 years. I was always a researcher. As someone who has a literary background, I think my strength is to look at stories and talk about the relevance of the stories. So I don't have any film background. That is also the reason why Monochromator doesn't do any sort of aesthetic or technical criticisms. We talk about the story and the significance of that story only. And I think as a literature major, I think I was very apt to do that. I was a contributor to Prismov for many years.
So that's the background. And I suppose the larger background is the Korean film industry, which has always been a strong industry, and Korea is a great market or producer of movies and always has been. But definitely it has come to wider international attention in the last decade. So are Prismov and Monochromator, are they a result of that, or is that a coincidence?
When you say Korean movie industry, you mean Korean productions, right? Prismov, we try to do one Asian movie every year, and we publish 4 times a year. So I wouldn't say it is directly related with the Korean film industry, but I would still say that Korea has a very strong culture of movie going still. People love to consume movies, and I think that provided a very fertile soil for such magazine to thrive.
Okay, because it just seems to me, just back on the film industry or the production, that Korea, of course, it has a great internal audience, but Korea internationally was known as like a place that produced genre movies. Now it's just everything. Part of it's Netflix having a production shop there. You can spend all your time on Netflix just watching Korean productions. But Korean productions, I feel, used to be in a hole that Western audiences didn't really allow it to escape. And now it has escaped, and we're realizing that they're doing everything and they do it really well. And that only comes out of an industry that is very strong to begin with because it's popular locally. Am I wrong?
No, you're totally right. What stuck with me is that Koreans have been making movies and they have been doing it very well. Koreans and the Prismov team has been publishing really good film magazine, and that is also something that we do really well. And I think Monochromator is a translation of that to the wider audience as well.
So then my second question about the magazine, is it really a film magazine or is it a political magazine?
Question that I receive every single time in an interview, and I think my answer shifts every time I get this question. The bottom line is that I believe engaging with films should be political because this is a form of art that we are still engaging with every day. I don't know how many hours I spend on Netflix every day, but because this is an art form that is so part of our lives right now, we need to think about the political significance that enabled these productions because movies need money to be made. It is one of the most expensive art forms to be made with a lot of stakeholders. That shows that movies will always be responding to the urgencies of today. Because of that, we need to politicize our movie watching experience. That is how I would answer this question. But also, this is also something that I think our readers should decide, whether it's a film magazine or a political magazine, if they can relate also to the political nature of films and understand the significance of engaging with films politically. That is my hope.
It's a magazine that makes you think, but I also don't think it's a magazine that is difficult to read. A lot of magazines of this nature are just full of jargon, either film jargon or political theory, and your magazine is remarkably free of that. In their first issue, you talk about Barbenheimer and the date of it coming out as the launch of both American Hard and Soft Power, which is a good angle to look at it in terms of a lens, but it isn't didactic and it reads in a very accessible manner. So is that a choice or is that just what happened?
It's an absolute choice. I think because I come from an academic background, I was very sick of texts that are simply unreadable. Like, I don't know how many hours I spend trying to understand the Rida. And what is the point if you don't understand it, especially when it's political? Because politics is the tool that everyone must have in their daily lives to navigate their world better. And if that is not accessible, then it's bad writing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just find that also jargon is easy to use for people who know it. It ties into what I always say, and I've been saying it a lot recently for obvious reasons, but that ideology is easy and thinking is hard. So to make the thinking simple is actually quite a feat, because it's not, like I said, it's not a simple magazine and it's not dumb by any stretch of the imagination. It's quite intelligent, and yet it's very readable. What were your inspirations as you were creating this thing from scratch? Did any magazines influence you, or was it talking to people? What were the inspirations behind it?
I can maybe name two inspirations, especially for the first issue and the general concept. We had that reference point of a prism. Coming up with that concept of monochromator was quite natural. It seemed like a logical next step for this press. What I wanted to do was to shed light on the rather unnoticed aspects of these films. And I think in that regard, MacGuffin was a really big influence, actually, because although it's not a film magazine, what they do is they talk about one object and they do it in every single aspect and talk about aspects that people normally might not think about. I remember in their chain issue, they had an article on the chain as a metaphor for slavery and also a story about bike chains. And I thought that was brilliant. And that is what I wanted to do with Monochromator as well. Another big inspiration actually came from my trip to LA in 2023. I was in LA for Printed Matter's art book fair. And it was my first morning and I walked to the Walmart. I was absolutely shaken because it was my first time being back to the US after many years. It was my first time back since COVID. And I was shaken because Walmart is a store, but it was also the most patriotic thing that I've ever seen. It was like rows and rows of American flag alongside cereal. It was like these cereal boxes were soldiers that were marching with the flag. It was ridiculous. And then there I realized that Walmart is so shocking to me specifically because I live in Germany, which is a country that lost World War II. And the US is a country that has won the World War II and is still living in that patriotic glory. And grocery stores in Germany reflecting their defeat are very depressing. And 2023 summer, it was Barbenheimer summer. And at the Walmart, I had this revelation that Walmart is Barbenheimer. There is that soft capitalistic power that filled these stores, but there was also this hard military power that was represented by the rows and rows of flags. And I felt like the products and the flags were leveled at a similar patriotic significance. And it was after that trip that I decided to make an issue on Barbenheimer.
Yeah, that's interesting that you found it in one place, because I tend to separate the two. They're both industrial, the soft and the hard power, but I do tend to separate them, but I can see where that would come from. So you do the first issue, you assemble it. What was the reaction to the first issue?
The first time we really interacted with our readers and experienced their reaction was at IndieCon last year. And there, actually, the most frequent question that we received was, what's going to be the second issue? That already told me so much that people found what we did interesting and they were looking forward to seeing what we do more. And another reaction was that, yeah, people are a little bit sick of these film criticisms that are full of jargons and that are so detached from our reality. Stories are about reality. And at one point, we have to bring the stories back to the reality. And I think because it's a film magazine that was so relatable, I think that really satisfied a certain thirst there was for the readers of film criticisms.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Jeremy Leslie at Mag Culture. We're proud to support The Full Bleed because we love magazines too. Visit magculture.com and see why print is far from over. It's just getting started. Read the journal for interviews and reviews, listen to our podcasts, visit our shop in London and online, and come to our live events in London and New York. We love magazines. Subscribe to our newsletter for weekly updates, all at magculture.com.
Print is Dead is made possible by the support of the Society of Publication Designers. The SPD powers the future of visual storytelling, setting the standard for editorial excellence and shaping the future of visual culture. For more information, visit spd.org.
Film criticism, like a lot of different criticisms, the first access point that a lot of people had to film criticism were reviews in newspapers. But every newspaper, no matter how small, had a film reviewer. And then the larger papers had maybe the person who reacted to the movie and then a critic who wrote about it in a larger context. And that has gone away, and that's become a very personal thing. And film isn't the only art form that has suffered from that. All art forms have suffered from that. Book reviewers now are rare, and they're mostly bloggers or podcasters. There is like a gap in the world of criticism. Is there an attempt to fill it in some way? Can you fill it? Who is reading this? So you talked about meeting the readers, but who are they? I asked a few questions there probably.
Yeah, I think what is actually really interesting about the first issue readers is that they are either young women who want to read about the post-colonial feminist angles that we bring to Barbenheimer phenomenon. And the second large group of readers is actually old men, old white men, who are critical of the ideas of American exceptionalism and who are interested in the historical aspect of Monochromator. When people ask me, can you describe Monochromator in 3 words? I say Monochromator is a contextual, decontextual, and recontextual magazine. We reveal the long history, especially in the Barbenheimer issue, the long history that in the end came into fruition in 2023 as a Barbenheimer phenomenon. I think there are these old group of people who are interested in that historical explanation of things.
And I wonder if your older male readers are also people who just miss film criticism or thinking about films in a larger way. I guess this goes back to my earlier question. They used to be able to read this kind of thing, maybe not exactly like this, but something like it in a lot of places, and now it's hard to find.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think even now, film magazines are mostly about now and what is coming.
Yes.
But because we reflect back on the films, we're always choosing movies that were already released. And we're taking a slow step in analyzing these movies. And I think this type of slow and considerate engagement of films is maybe something that is communicating to the older audience that we have.
Would you ever consider moving on from an annual and increasing the frequency?
We're actually, yeah, we are. We want to publish at least 2 issues this year.
Okay. So your next issue is coming out soon.
Yes.
If it's not out already, thinking of when we're recording it. So that means you are planning issue 3 already. Now, your next issue is on the Middle East, on Palestine.
Yes.
So that's a different, Barbenheimer as a cultural phenomenon was massive from a movie point of view, obviously. The Palestinian issue is quite a different group of people. And because the movies you're talking about weren't blockbusters, both Barbie and Oppenheimer were absolute blockbusters. The movies you're talking about in the next issue, one of them did well, but the other one didn't. So because your subject matter changes so much each time, do you feel like you're going to have to look for a different audience each time, or do you think that there will be crossover from one issue to the other?
I think there will be a crossover because although the subject and the movies are different, what we do is the same. Essentially, every issue starts with the manifesto. Every issue is titled as something. The Barbenheimer issue was titled Birth of a Nation, talking about the rebirth of the US as an empire. The second issue, where we talk about The Act of Killing by Joshua Oppenheimer and The Zone of Interest by Jonathan Glazer, the movies are very different. One is a documentary even, but we also started with the manifesto, which is We Refuse to Be Afraid. And this manifesto came before anything.
Is that how it starts?
Yes. Always we start with the manifesto and then we choose films that can communicate these manifestos the best.
Because the manifestos, they're open-ended. And then you find the movies that fit. That feels like backward engineering in a way.
I think I am someone who has many opinions about many things. Always my opinion comes first, and then I find examples. And I would say the finding examples part would be the finding the movies.
So, using the light analogy, that's a lot of filters. So it is like it is a monochromator, right? You're finding the idea and then seeing how it filters out. I see how that's working now. I just figured it out. I feel silly for my last question. So what about Monochromator doesn't sit on its own? There's the other magazine. So tell us about that media company as a whole. Is it larger than just the two magazines? Even with the media brand, I can see symposiums or lecture series or something, movie clubs. I can see a lot of things happening with something like this, where you get intelligent people together to have intelligent conversations about what they're watching on screen. Are there any plans like that?
So it's a very small team. It's 3 girls of very similar age, which I love. I love that we are 3 girls just publishing and publishing magazines one after another. On the Korean side of things, there are many programs that happens part of Prismov. For Monochromator, not yet. But as a team, we are actually planning to publish more books, just single edition books.
Okay, so you are going into a role as a publisher.
Yes, but of course, we're always planning events. Monochromator did a talk in New York recently. We're also probably going to do a few events when the second issue comes out. But I don't think these will ever become the main part of our team. We are always going to be about printed matter. Actually, our slogan is we make thought tangible.
Oh, that's nice.
And this would be what we keep doing.
We end our shows always with what are 3 magazines that you love right now and why?
3?
3.
Okay. As I said, I love MacGuffin.
Everyone loves MacGuffin.
Does everyone talk about MacGuffin?
It's one of the ones that comes up a lot. We spoke to them 2 seasons very early on in the show, and it comes up a lot. And for the exact same reasons you said. They love the way they take a very simple idea, an object, and then just deconstruct it on so many levels, ways that you didn't. They always surprise you. Let's put it that way. And it's always a good surprise.
Yeah, I think you couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said it better. For that reason, I love MacGuffin. There is also a magazine called Famous for My Dinner Parties based out of Berlin. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah.
I'm a foodie myself, and as I said, films are an everyday entertainment, and that is why it needs to be politicized. Food is the same thing. Food is a little bit more everyday than films. I'll have to admit that. But there is also a political nuance under food as well, and do that very well. Third one. Can I say Prismov?
Of course, you can say whatever you want.
Prismov, I love Prismov because, okay, when I was a contributor, the moment that I fell in love with Prismov was when they published their issue on We Need to Talk About Kevin. They did an interview with a feminist mom organization, which to me was a brilliant way of making that story very real and tangible and relatable. Because how did mom see We Need to Talk About Kevin? What did they say? What did they think about? How did they think about? What did they think about what raising was? And for example, one of the answers that the mom said was that for her, the most terrifying thing about We Need to Talk About Kevin was that there was never a second person that was taking care of Kevin. And because they are moms, they could see that. And that brings another very realistic, that reveals another very realistic aspect of that movie as well. So that was the moment that I fell in love with Prismov, and still a big fan. Love to be on their team.
And does Prismov, in Korea, since most of our listeners are not in Korea, what is the impact of Prismov in Korea? They're the largest film magazine there. They must be quite influential.
Yeah, so for example, have you seen Exuma? It was a Korean horror movie that was released, I believe, earlier last year. It actually premiered at Berlinale 2024.
Heard of it, but I never saw it.
Okay, we were doing an interview with that director. The production company convinced the director to be part of that interview. And how they convinced this director was telling him that this is a film magazine that every Gen Z film lovers read in Korea. That is the impact.
So is the audience for Prism of mostly young? I mean, you talked about Gen Z filmgoers.
Yes, the audience for Prism of is quite young, and I think actually that is what separates Prism of and Monochromator the most, other than the whole way that we engage with the movies. Because as I said, we also get to the older, wider male audience as well.
This has been The Full Bleed, a podcast about the future of magazines and the magazines of the future. The Full Bleed is a production of Magazium LLC. This episode was produced by Patrick Mitchell. If you'd like to comment on the show or just, start a conversation, send me an email at hello@magazium.co or visit our website at magazium.co, where you can read transcripts of all of our interviews along with portfolios, archival photos, links, and more. We've got a swag shop too. My name is Arjun Basu. Thanks very much for listening. Welcome to the future.